Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our participants, featuring U.S. Ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic, Donald Lu. Ambassador Donald Lu is a Foreign Service officer with 28 years of government service. Prior to his assignment to Bishkek, Ambassador Lu was the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Albania. His other overseas postings include Deputy Chief of Mission in India, Azerbaijan, and also in Kyrgyzstan. He also served for a year as Chargé d'Affaires at our embassy in Azerbaijan. Ambassador Lu worked on the Ebola crisis in West Africa as the Deputy Coordinator for Ebola Response at the Department of State. So he knows pandemics. He's also served in Pakistan, Georgia, and Washington. And as a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone, he helped restore hand-dug water wells and teach health education and latrine construction. Always a useful skill. Ambassador Lu proudly hails from Huntington Beach, California, and as a fellow Californian, yes, I understand that proudly hails. He graduated from Princeton University with both a master's and a bachelor's degree in international relations. And he is married to Dr. Ariel Ahart, and they have 2 children. So I am going to take the privilege of the chair and ask Ambassador Lu the first question. Basically, what is your origin story? What attracted you to diplomacy, and what steps and what processes led you to decide on this career?
Barbara, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all today. With so many of our Foreign Service colleagues having resigned these past few years, I think the best thing that we can do is nurture a new generation of American diplomats. I want to thank you for the incredible leadership that you personally have shown in that effort at Georgetown. So my kids would be laughing hysterically right now if they thought their dad had an origin story. It's like I'm Wolverine. So maybe I'll start with a story about my kids. My son was just 5 when we went to Baku, Azerbaijan. As all of you may know, being a diplomat means a lot of sacrifice from our family members. And this was a particularly traumatic move for my son because he loved his kindergarten in Roslyn, Virginia. And he came home one day upset from his new school, and my wife asked him what was wrong. And he said the other kids were teasing him because he looked Chinese. And so she sat him down and tried to talk to him. Those of you who are parents can relate to trying to reason with an upset 5-year-old. She asked him what he thought he looked like and how he wanted to look. I should note at this point that my wife is of European descent. And he responded, I want to look like an American. I want to look like my papa. And to that I say, right on, son. This is what an American looks like. Our son turns 19 this week. He's going to Santa Clara University in California, another fine Jesuit college, and he looks just like his dad. My origin story started, like many of us in the Foreign Service, as an intern. I was an intern during graduate school in the research and reference section of the US mission to the United Nations, the library. And I worked for the legendary V. Manber, who had run the library for more than 30 years. And you might be thinking, how boring, working in the library. It wasn't for me. It was fascinating. It was during the first Gulf War. I had an opportunity to read messages from all over the world, including our embassies in Kuwait City and Riyadh. And I can remember looking out my window and seeing then Ambassador to the UN, Tom Pickering, crossing the street, gesticulating wildly as he talked on his huge 1990s era cell phone. My main job was to go through files and retire materials that lacked historical value. Again, kind of sounds boring, right? It wasn't. They had files going back decades. I know crazy secrets about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, Iran-Contra, and I also had the opportunity to meet amazing Foreign Service officers like Steve McGann. Many of you may know Steve. Steve at that time was a 20-something African-American economic officer who was very kind to me, and he would later become ambassador to Fiji. To this day, I love meeting our interns every year at our embassies overseas because it reminds me of my origin story.
Thank you. That's a great story. Yes, yes, that is a wonderful origin story, and being able to read all that history and while working for Tom Pickering, who is history personified, is something that all of our students would aspire to be able to follow in your footsteps. I'm now going to turn the program over to Hamid. This series was started by a Dean in Virginia Rusk Fellow, a Foreign Service officer, Carolyn Savage. And within that tradition, successor Rusk Fellows have run this series on behalf of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. Hamid served most recently in the Office of the Deputy Secretary of State. His previous assignments include Mexico, Venezuela, Tunisia, where he was working on Libya, and the Kuwait desk. So maybe we can have a conversation on the margins about Kuwait. Hamid is a graduate of the Georgetown School of Foreign Service and has a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Medford, Massachusetts. Hamid, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bodine, and thanks again for joining us, Ambassador Lu. Our next question is, how do you see yourself and how do others see you? How do you think others see you within the foreign affairs world? What ways do you identify, and how do you think that has shaped your approach to your work and others' approach to you?
Hamid, I knew I liked you the moment you asked whether we could ditch the neckties today. During this pandemic, I think I've worn a necktie less than a dozen times, and almost all of them have been on Zoom calls with cabinet ministers in which I'm also wearing shorts. I'm not wearing shorts today. It's -10 outside in Bishkek, but I'm wearing my Hawaiian shirt in honor of my maternal grandmother, Abby, who was born in Honolulu before Hawaii became a US state. But it's really her birthright, having been born on a territory that would later become part of the United States, that secured my family's American citizenship. My father immigrated to the US from Taiwan, and before that he grew up in Shanghai. So by some measures, I'm a third generation American on my mom's side, and I'm also the proud son of an immigrant. And in some of the places I've lived and worked, I've really stood out as an Asian American, and in other places it's barely been noticed. As Barbara mentioned, I started out my career in government as a young Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone. And I could clear the courtyard of all the children by just striking a Bruce Lee karate pose and saying, "Aliya!" I don't actually know anything about karate, but at least in the time I lived there, people in West Africa had never seen someone from East Asia before, except in martial arts movies, which were super popular there. When I served later in Tbilisi, Georgia in the 1990s, my wife and I would be walking down the sidewalk together, and then kids would be on the other side walking towards us. And again, my wife is of European descent. They would start talking to my wife in Georgian, assuming that she was my Georgian guide or something. And I used to speak a lot of Georgian because I was a consular officer there and I spoke Georgian every day. So I responded to them in Georgian and their mouths would just drop to the floor. And they were so amazed that this Chinese guy could speak their language. They literally started walking backwards with us to see what else I could say. I'm currently serving in Kyrgyzstan, and at least I feel like I don't look so dissimilar from Kyrgyz people. And so my kids and I often joke that if the mobs were ever to attack our embassy, the kids and I would just slowly and quietly slip out the back, blend into the crowd, and leave my Anglo wife to fend for herself. In Kyrgyzstan, it's much more exotic and dangerous to be an American than to be of Asian descent, because pretty much everyone here is of Asian descent. So what really defines me here is my Americanness.
Wow, thanks for that, Ambassador Lu. How do you think, along those lines, as a broader question, the State Department's approach to diverse and inclusive workforce has changed over the course of your career? Have there been initiatives you've seen that actively support and encourage change?
So one of the curious things that happens to you when you become an ambassador is that you're required to attend something called the ambassadorial seminar. And we typically refer to it as the ambassadorial charm school. And the State Department works really hard to put a balance of career State Department officers and political appointees in every class so that we can learn from each other and get to know each other. Now, I'm going to generalize here, but the political appointees are usually older, they're always richer, and they're sometimes a little less politically correct than the career bureaucrats. I can recall that during my last experience in the ambassadorial charm school, we had an openly gay foreign service officer. He was nominated to be an ambassador. And several of the political appointees found it surprising, and they worried about how our colleague would represent the US abroad. I want to note here that he completely charmed them after 3 weeks together, and we're all really good friends. But the point of my story is those political appointees hadn't grown up in the State Department over 30 years, and they hadn't seen the tremendous change in LGBTIQ attitudes that many of us have seen over these last 3 decades. I don't know if I can honestly say that I've seen huge gains for many protected groups, but I have seen our culture completely shift on how we treat LGBTIQ colleagues within our service. Years ago, I can remember seeing colleagues denied jobs because of their sexual orientation, being derided openly by their peers. LGBTIQ colleagues were encouraged to stay in the closet, and in the past, we would not confront foreign governments about the treatment of our gay and lesbian officers or their family members. In the years leading up to and including 2010, that completely shifted. I am proud to say we no longer tolerate discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. We fight for the rights of our LGBTIQ colleagues in terms of protections and immunities abroad. And we have finally even issued diplomatic passports to same-sex partners to show that we value them in the same way that we value all of our family members. We have really come an incredibly long way in a relatively short amount of time.
Thank you. Can you tell us about one of your champions or mentors? How did they influence your career? And how have you paid this forward in your own career?
So I have 2 favorite ambassadors that I've worked for in the Foreign Service. It's hard because I've been lucky to work for some wonderful people over time. One is Ambassador Nancy Powell, a 5-time US ambassador, and the other is Ambassador Masha Yovanovitch, recently our ambassador to Ukraine, and made famous by her service at Georgetown University, amongst a few other things. Nancy taught me what it meant to be an ambassador. She was and is an incredibly thoughtful person and treated people like she would herself like to be treated. And I remember if you were a new person coming to post in her embassy, you would always be welcomed by a homemade cookies and a handwritten note waiting in your house or apartment. She held monthly birthday parties for all of the staff in her office, and she would speak last at our country team meetings so as not to upstage other people. And she would knit booties for all of the couples in the embassy having babies. We worked together in India with more than 500 American employees. Nancy was knitting night and day. I do all of these things as ambassador, except for the booties part. Unfortunately, I have no idea how to knit. I did have a humbling experience this year in my 7th year as ambassador. With COVID suddenly, for the first time in 7 years, I didn't have someone in my house working as a cook. And yet I had about 1/3 of our embassy staff turning over this fall. I personally baked over 500 cookies in September. I was a cookie baking machine.
Wow.
I have thought a lot about Masha Yovanovitch lately. She embodies to me the courage and loyalty that all Foreign Service officers should hope to exemplify. When I served with her 14 years ago, the Kyrgyz KGB arrested a young woman on our staff. She worked on our security staff. Masha marched down to the minister's office. She planted herself there, refusing to leave until our colleague was released. And anyone who knows Masha knows she's an amazing diplomat, but she swears like a sailor in Russian when she's pushed to the wall. And after surviving 6 hours of Masha's abuse, the minister finally relented and released our staff person. here in Kyrgyzstan, when we have faced challenges in recent years, where our staff have been threatened by terrorists, Russians, mobsters, and now the pandemic, we have often asked ourselves, what would Masha do?
Thank you. And I guess one follow-up question is about paying it forward in your own career. How have you sought mentees? How do you deal with, I think a lot of students and entry-level foreign service officers may have questions of, they're afraid to email someone, they're afraid to check in with someone, to ask someone for help. So what advice do you have for them on seeking mentors?
So when I was in India with Nancy Powell, we held a conference for entry-level colleagues. And the innovation of our conference was that we really let our colleagues who were new to the Foreign Service run the whole thing and define the agenda and make it theirs. And I'll tell you why that was important. I must say, as a junior officer myself years ago, I found that everyone tried to tell us what we needed to know. Very few people were ready to listen about what we thought we needed to know from them. I thought it was one of the best conferences I have ever seen. In Embassy New Delhi, because we produce, Mission India, we produce a ton of visas. We figured we had 5% of all of the entry-level officers in the world just within Mission India. And then we invited people from all over South and Central Asia to come. But it was such a dynamic experience. Bob Blake was the assistant secretary at the time for the SCA Bureau. We brought in the director general. We brought in all sorts of incredible speakers. And that was all to be responsive to what our colleagues who were in this entry-level group defined as what they wanted to hear from us. I must say, when I interact with colleagues who are new to the Foreign Service, I am blown away by what they know about a world that I don't understand, a world of social media, a world of technology, a world of how people now communicate with each other. They remind me much more of my teenage children than they do of officers my generation in the Foreign Service. And so I hope that those of us who are in the senior Foreign Service never forget it's very much a two-way street. When we're out there trying to support our colleagues who are new, we are able to glean so much from them about how we can be successful as diplomats abroad and in Washington.
Thanks for that, Ambassador. You touched on this a little earlier, but how have you felt that your perspectives or ideas in professional or policy discussions were received differently because of who you are, or more likely perceived to be, rather than the proposals themselves?
I know that in the private sector, as well as in government, sometimes you get a bozo for a boss. When I was on my second tour in Tbilisi, Georgia, I had a complete bozo as a supervisor. He second-guessed my decisions. He treated me with disdain. He even tried to prevent me from blowing the whistle on a corruption scheme. And so this was the 1990s. I discovered that we were letting our Georgian staff procure diesel fuel without supervision, and they were paying above market prices, in spite of the fact we were buying massive quantities of diesel, over $100,000 a year, because we had really bad electricity and we ran our generators around the clock. So what I wanted to do was investigate. I wanted to shut down this corrupt practice and put in place a bunch of management controls. My boss was skeptical, and he was super defensive about his friend, the motor pool supervisor, Irakli. They hung out together. Until this day, I don't know if he wouldn't support me because I was Asian American. Maybe it was because I was young, inexperienced. Maybe it was because I was from the political cone, which means that I wasn't a career administrative officer. So I devised a plan. I put on paper a formal proposal to institute new management controls that included my personal involvement in the procurement chain, but also the solicitation of multiple bids on our fuel. And I shared it with my boss, and at the same time, I shared it with my boss's boss. I intentionally omitted the part about the investigation into the guilty parties. I really focused on constructing a better system going forward. My boss really had no choice but to agree. The motor pool supervisor at Irakli saw the writing on the wall. I think he saw that he could be busted at any moment. He resigned within a few days. As a 20-something junior administrative officer, I wanted to see justice for people that I thought were stealing from us. As an older diplomat now, I can see that my perception that I was not being taken seriously may have been less about me. It may have been more about my bozo boss wanting to protect his corrupt friend. But what I can also see is that in the wild west of Tbilisi in the mid-1990s, just a couple of years after the fall of the Soviet Union, we were hanging by a thread. We didn't have the bandwidth or the authority to conduct criminal investigations or prosecute the guilty. Over a career in government, I've seen a handful now of cases of malfeasance and learned that sometimes, particularly overseas, we have to settle for stopping the fraud and that we don't always have the wherewithal to punish the guilty.
Thanks for sharing that story, Ambassador. Just a reminder to the audience that we have a question and answer box. Please state your name and affiliation with your question. We'll turn to questions after my next question. We already have great questions in there, so thank you for those who've already submitted questions, but please use the Q&A box for questions. Ambassador, what steps institutionally would you recommend to the State Department or other foreign policy players to take to improve the culture and opportunities for diverse leaders of all backgrounds to succeed?
Thanks, it's a great question. When I was in college, I first took the Foreign Service exam as a senior. And soon after taking the exam, I received a letter in the mail, like all of us in the Foreign Service have received. And the letter said, "You have not passed the exam, but because you're from an underrepresented minority, you've been given extra points and allowed to progress to the oral examination stage." I have to admit, it felt bad. And I didn't take the oral exam that year. I went on to go into the Peace Corps. 25 years later, I kind of felt the same way. I was being considered to be a candidate to be ambassador. And I remember being put on list after list and never getting selected. And at some point, I came to the realization that I was the ethnic diversity on the list. In those days, if a bureau put forth a list of all white men, the Secretary of State's office would send it back and say, "Not good enough, fix it." And once again, I felt bad because it felt to me like I was on those lists, not because I was necessarily the best candidate, but because I was a minority. I think we need to tell our young diplomats and our senior foreign service officers, we have chosen them because of the most qualified and capable candidates. And if we have trouble finding qualified minority candidates, we either need to look harder or we need to support development programs that identify candidates with promise and give them the opportunities and training they need to succeed. I'm a huge fan of the Pickering and Wrangel program for new foreign service officers. It pays for their graduate school and then they join the foreign service afterwards and commit a certain number of years. Some of the most gifted colleagues I've seen in the foreign service have come out of that program. And the new initiative by Secretary Pompeo now to send up and coming mid-level officers to the Harvard Business School. What I think we all want to be told is that we were chosen because we're the best at what we do. I think that's the message that will help us to attract and retain talent in the foreign service.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now turn to the audience questions. So as a reminder, please use the Q&A box for questions. Please state your name and affiliation along with your question. And we have a lot of great questions so far. So I'll start with a first-year student in the School of Foreign Service, Ireland Neville, asks, for students wanting to become foreign service officers in the future, what do you recommend to be the first on a path to that profession?
It's a good question. I think the traditional answer would be sign up for an internship in the State Department. It's a very rigorous and structured program. You have to sign up almost a year in advance because of the security clearance part of the selection process. But let me go in a different direction. I think if you want to be successful in the Foreign Service, you should know what it's like to live abroad. right? Why do I love being a diplomat? I love being a diplomat because I love the adventure of living overseas, and everything that I do is super difficult. I have to do it in a foreign language, and it's really exciting and interesting. You know, I have to go down to the store to buy a loaf of bread. I never know what's going to happen, how I'm going to be treated, whether I'm going to be able to communicate what I need to do to buy that loaf of bread. I like that a lot. And I learned to like that in the Peace Corps. So I think there are many different ways that you can learn to figure out whether that kind of lifestyle is good for you. I see people working for NGOs abroad. Again, Peace Corps is now a very common route into the Foreign Service. Missionaries, you can work for international business abroad. I think having some international experience is a great way to see if this is a way of life for you.
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions because they touch on similar themes. One is from a 2007 alum of Georgetown, who's a London-based journalist. Ivis Proganati says, Ambassador Lu, thank you for your service. I appreciate the empathy you reflect on in your answers. And it asks what posting has been the most challenging for you and why. And Joanna Gasper, who's a diplomat in the Portuguese Foreign Ministry, asks if you can share the most difficult moment of your career and how you handled it.
So let me start with the last question, the most difficult moment of my career. I told the story of Ambassador Jovanovic in the KGB minister's office, getting our staff person out of jail. There's a flip side to that story, which involves me. So I was the young, plucky #2, the deputy ambassador here. And while she was at the jail, I got a call, and they were trying to arrest a bunch of other members of our staff in the middle of the night. And so I go down to where this is happening. And you know, I don't speak great Russian, but I speak enough Russian to try to make myself understood. And I'm negotiating with the KGB about what are you doing trying to arrest members of our security staff. And we have this confrontation for about half an hour. And it's not going well. And they're starting to seize computer servers. This is not on the Chancellery, it's an off-campus location. They're like getting ready to arrest our staff. And I'm getting very worked up at this point, and we're really going at it. And at one point they say, okay, we're just arresting everyone here, all of the local staff. And if you wanna go with them, you can go down to the KGB headquarters. And I said, what? You can't arrest our staff. And I was completely indignant. I had our lawyer with us at the time. So we get in our car and we go down to KGB headquarters. They, of course, didn't let us into KGB headquarters. They took our people inside there and they're interrogating our staff, and we're standing out in front of the gates. It's midnight, right? We're out there for a long time demanding that our people be released. It's 2 a.m. by the time the last person is released. But I have never felt more responsible for the safety and well-being of our colleagues at that moment in time. And I felt like everything that I did could decide whether our colleagues would be stuck in jail for years or be tortured or be abused. Fortunately, they were all released and they were all fine. But it's that sense of responsibility for each other that I think is really profound in the Foreign Service. And it's why we work so well as a team. We really try to act like a family. The other question was, where was the toughest place to work? I always say Azerbaijan was my toughest assignment. It is a place with a lot of really important US interests. There were certainly military strategic interests because of Afghanistan and our cooperation with military there. There was also oil and gas interests there, but it's also a really difficult environment from the standpoint of trying to work with the Azeri government on human rights and democracy. And for the 3 years I was there, it was a tough struggle. I do want to believe that struggle resulted in us being able to support Azerbaijan as a developing democracy, but it was really tough going. And I think that's true for a lot of former communist countries, that they're on a road. And I am confident they're going to get there to a place where they have freedom of speech and and NGOs can operate freely and human rights are respected, but it's a long road and it requires a lot of international partners to support them on that road.
Nate Haft, one of your former entry-level officers in Albania and Pickering, says he'd like to ask you, what are the major areas the next generation of foreign service officers should be focusing on to improve the organization? He says if you had another 20 years in the service, which by the way, that means he's presuming you don't, what major change would you be working towards to make our organization even better?
Nathan Haft is one of my favorite people I've ever worked for. I think I told him then, and I will repeat it for all of you. Everyone watch for Nate Haft's career. He's going places. Be nice to him. He's going to be an ambassador in about 5 minutes. Here's what I think about the Foreign Service. Unlike the military, it's not a service that takes care of you in the same way, right? We don't have a gazillion dollars to take care of your spiritual needs or your health needs or your family in the same way that the US military does. You kind of have to look out for yourself. And that includes, I think of where Nate is in his career. I'm getting towards the end of my career, right? I've had an amazing experience, but I can see the end. For those unfamiliar with the Foreign Service, we do operate like the US military, in which you have to continue to be promoted or else you're out, right? You can't just stagnate at the same level forever and remain there. There's an up and out system. So it's good in that sense. It allows space to be developed for people coming up in the service. But it's bad if you're at my stage in the Foreign Service, because you're looking at the end. I can see the terminus in front of me. You got to pace yourself. You got to take care of your health. You really got to take care of your family. I cannot tell you how many of my colleagues have gone through divorces or really tough times with family members because of this career. More and more now, Foreign Service officers are being asked to do assignments separate from their families, which I have not been asked to do so far in my career, but it could be coming. I think that's true for all of us at some point. So Nate, what I would say is you and your generation are going to do great in the Foreign Service. I'm not worried about the success of your generation. What I am worried about is the toll it takes on you personally. And I hope that you are taking care of yourself and making sure your family is happy, because that's what's ultimately going to allow you to stay in the Foreign Service. Of my classmates who've actually left after all these years, it's almost all for personal reasons, and it's because of something involving a spouse or a child. It's usually not because they don't love this career.
Sajid Gandhi, senior professional staff member at the House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs, asks, the GAO last January published a study looking at barriers to diversity at the State Department. It found that racial and ethnic minorities at state are less likely to be promoted than their white coworkers with similar education, occupation, or years in federal service. Beyond recruitment, what are some things the Foreign Service and Civil Service State Department leaders can do to help address this barrier?
Hi, Sajid. It's nice that you could join us today. It's a great question. So I love to read the promotion list. I'm a weird Foreign Service officer that likes to go through every name to see who I know who's been promoted. And I usually try to write notes to everyone that I know to celebrate that moment. It doesn't come very often for Foreign Service officers. What I can tell you is, if you read the list from the top to the bottom, there are a lot of white men on the top of the list. And then when you start to get into Foreign Service level 3, 4, 5, and 6, you see a lot more diversity, right? It's really obvious when you just read names, the family backgrounds of the people who are there. So I agree with the premise that we actually have been pretty good at attracting good minority and women candidates into the Foreign Service. I think without doubt that that's true over the last decade, or maybe even a decade and a half. Have we been as good retaining them and then promoting them into senior service? And I think unquestionably the answer is no, that for some reason, those really talented Foreign Service officers who happen to be minorities, many of them leave to pursue other opportunities. Why is that? Maybe they're so talented that they're just getting right and left opportunities from Google, Apple, and Cisco, and they're going out to make millions. Maybe. Maybe it's because the bureaucracy of the State Department, like the bureaucracy of any US government agency, is pretty stifling. And maybe that doesn't appeal to minorities of younger generations in the Foreign Service. And maybe it's because, as I suggested before, we are sometimes getting a step up in terms of being recognized and being put on lists and considered, but that we're not being given the right message, that we're not being told that we're really valued for what we bring to the table and our skills, but we're being somehow given a special incentive because we're minorities. Again, I feel really strongly that that's not the message I want to be told. And I hope that we're able to communicate in what we're doing a better message for our younger officers, that we value you for what you bring to the table. We value you for who you are. We want you to stay in this business and we want you to succeed.
Reverend Chris Wagner of Georgetown has a more philosophical question for you. There's a nice telescope in your room. What are you looking for when gazing the stars?
It is not a nice telescope. It's a super inexpensive telescope that I bought when our kids were younger because I thought we would do a lot of stargazing. What you learn quickly is it's hard to stargaze from really polluted urban areas where a lot of our embassies sit. So we haven't done a lot of amazing stargazing. We have a great balcony. I'm in my bedroom here in my house. Right off of my balcony here, right off the bedroom is a balcony in which you have an incredible view, often of the moon. And so we've been taking this little kid's telescope out and looking up close at the moon.
Klo Chang of Chemonics asks or says, as a Taiwanese American, I want to also thank you for being here and for paving the way for Asian Americans. What ways have you seen your identity as an Asian American been an asset to the way you approach situations or to the way you lead?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I have intentionally not tried to serve in East Asia. And I think it was always because I was a little afraid that people wouldn't take me as seriously as in other parts of the world where I don't share the same ethnic identity as the people of that country. And I know that's actually quite different than other ethnic minorities in the Foreign Service. I'll use as an example. I've served in India now twice, and an incredible contribution now made to our mission in India by South Asian Americans, both Pakistani Americans and Indian Americans who happen to speak Indian languages really well, but also they understand a depth of family understanding, some of the values and connections. I saw on the website for this discussion series, Azra Zaya's discussion about what it was like for her to serve in India. I served with Azra. What an amazing colleague. What an amazing ability for her to connect her ethnic identity with service professionally in Mission India. I must say I haven't done that. One of the things that really I have as a disability is I've studied now 9 different languages. I am terrible in Chinese. My family always spoke English at home. And so I took Chinese in college, and my teacher were just laughing hysterically because they looked at me and thought, you should speak Chinese. And like 4 or 5 words would come out of my mouth, and they just couldn't believe I couldn't speak Chinese. So I have not really taken advantage of my Asian heritage fully in my professional life. I hope it is something that connects me to other people who are minorities, however, and I've certainly tried to do that in every post that I've served at overseas.
We have a question from Tyler Savoy, who met you during your time in Tirana and in Bishkek. The question is, how do you balance the competing demands of diplomacy in the field with the expectations of headquarters?
So Tyler knows this. My favorite thing is to work in embassies where they really don't care what you do. So you can just do whatever you want overseas. So Kyrgyzstan, generally speaking, is one of those places where Washington generally leaves you alone. You kind of write in every week what's going on. They generally nod and say good luck. we had a revolution here in October, and it was crazy. You know, tanks on the streets, burned the president's office, angry mobs of people roaming the streets. You know, we had a lot of interest from Washington. You know, really almost 100% of it, very positive, supportive messages from diplomatic security, from the White House, from everyone trying to make sure we had what we need to keep Americans safe and keep our embassy colleagues safe. But that was new to me. Mostly for 2 years, we've just kind of done our own thing out here, tried to support American interests, and we haven't had to balance a lot of interest from Washington. When I was in India, we had a ton of interest from the Obama White House, from USAID, from the State Department. We had, you know, I can't even count the number of cabinet level visits. It was a difficult balancing act, and I give full credit to the ambassadors I served with there. They were largely the people who had to interface with Washington and make sure that Washington felt like it could direct our policy adequately, and we would just ignore that and do whatever we wanted. But you had to pretend that you were giving lip service to our overlords in Washington.
You mentioned your family earlier, and we have a question on balancing family and work from Carolina Scalera, Foreign Service Officer in the Dominican Republic, which is how have you learned to have that balance in this career, in this difficult career?
My wife and I were just talking the other day. We see these videos online on YouTube and other places about, you know, how during a pandemic to bring your family closer. And it's all about dining together. Honestly, it shocks me because we have always dined together as a family. We wake up with the kids, we make breakfast, we send them off to school. Okay, not during the pandemic, but then they come home, and I always make it home for dinner. It's been very rare in almost 30 years now of State Department service that I haven't been home for dinner every time. I have another mentor and friend of mine, Michelle Sisson. And Michelle, anyone who knows Michelle knows she works really hard. She's one of our, you know, we get our money's worth with Michelle's salary. But I remember Michelle, when she was raising her girls, she would go in super early to the morning as DCM in Islamabad, sometimes 4 in the morning, so that she could be home for dinner. That was how she made sure that she was being a good mom and supporting her family. I have a lot of respect for that. You know, the kind of discipline it takes to get up super early in the morning just to make sure that you had the evening with your family. I encourage all of us to do that. If we're not doing that, we're not doing our real jobs, which is taking care of our families.
Bailey Bria, first-year master's student at Georgetown in Asian Studies, asks, what has been the most meaningful issue you've worked on in your career?
So I find it interesting. I'm a person who, in my graduate school experience, I worked on Soviet foreign policy and arms control and all these kind of heady issues for the part of the world that I'm now serving in. But what I've really spent most of my time on here is organized crime and corruption. I don't really have any academic background on those issues, but those are such difficult issues for American interests abroad, whether it's our companies and getting them to try to compete fairly, whether it's governments who are under the thumb of criminal overlords and drug traffickers, or it's corruption that makes it much more difficult for us to have good relations with governments abroad. So I have been the anti-corruption and organized crime ambassador for these last 2 assignments, and I love it. It really excites me. I think there's no question but that the US values and US interests are to fight criminal activities and fight drug trafficking and to fight corrupt officials abroad. And we have made some incredible gains in some of the places that I've served. And I want to believe that's really been with the full support of the people in those countries who really don't want to be victim to whatever the local drug lord wants to do with their kids.
Liz Lee, mid-level FSO, asks if you have ever experienced discrimination or microaggressions, and if so, how you overcame those situations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess let me maybe take it in a slightly different direction. When I was in my last embassy in Tirana, Albania, I noticed about 6 months into my time there that as people left, they were being replaced by men, right? We actually had some ethnic diversity amongst our senior staff, but by the time the summer ended, that first 6 months I was at post, they were all men, like literally 20 people at the table, and everyone was a man. And I felt like something was going wrong here in the way that people before us had selected staff. So if you're not in the Foreign Service, you may not know that we generally pick people a year or two before they actually arrive at our embassies overseas. It involves a long personnel process, but then also often a year's worth of language training. So we didn't pick these folks, but somebody had, and it sure looked like there may have been some unintentional or intentional bias as a result. So we worked really hard to try to figure out, well, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to have it so a year from then or 2 years from then, we would not be handing off this problem to a future ambassador or deputy ambassador? And so my deputy, David Muniz, an incredible colleague who's our deputy chief of mission right now in Romania, set out to recruit the best female candidates he could find for every new job that was coming up at the senior ranks in our mission. He was amazing. And if you look at the key officers list right now in Tirana, Albania, you'll see it's actually a majority of women now fill the top ranks. The ambassador is a woman, the deputy ambassador is a woman, more than half of the senior heads of departments and agencies are women, and that's David Muniz. And he didn't just pick women who weren't qualified. He went out and found people who he knew and we could be proud of to nominate for these jobs. And so I do think that supervisors need to be aggressive as they think about, if you want to have a diverse mission and you're seeing that there is discrimination going on in the place that you work, it's up to you to go out and find the right people to counteract that.
Thanks for sharing that. It's not really a question, but Mingli's an entry-level officer who's very excited to note that she will be joining you in Bishkek in July for her first assignment. So I want to get that out there as well. That's
great.
That's Ming.
Bring your skis. It is very cold here in the winter, but we have very inexpensive snowboarding, skiing, snowshoeing, sledding. Any snow-related sports are really great here.
Glenn Morris, and I don't have an affiliation here, says, and I'll broaden it into a question, but he made a comment that with all due respect, there are issues at state, not just with retention or promotions, but with less awards, terminations, etc. And I guess I'll broaden the question to say, what advice would you have for mid-level officers who are considering leaving the Foreign Service because they feel like they haven't had similar opportunities for advancement, for awards, for recognition, whether it's from supervisors or depending on, usually it's kind of a direct supervisor, but as a broader issue. What advice?
I'm sure Glenn is right. I haven't looked at all the statistics myself, but I can tell you what I've seen as a manager the last few years. I've seen amazing minorities who are in the entry and mid-levels. I've seen some of our most outstanding colleagues in every place that I've worked for the past 15 years have been minorities or women or people who are from groups that have been traditionally disadvantaged in the Foreign Service. So I don't necessarily think that it's because there isn't talent there, but I'm sure he must be right that somehow we're not finding that we're recognizing that talent. I do also find, this is not exclusive to minorities, but it's true of all millennials out there, a certain impatience with this system, that our system is very slow and plodding, right? It's true for everything we do, but it's also true for promotion. I've been in 30 years now, and you progress at a certain pace, and you want to kind of just rush forward and become ambassador on your second assignment, it's not going to happen. We actually have rules that force you to be at certain levels in your career for a minimum amount of time before you can progress to the next level. That's just part of how we do this. In part, I tell more junior colleagues, it's because you want to enjoy the ride on the way up. If you get too fast to the senior foreign service, you'll be gone a few years later because we don't let you just linger at the senior ranks. You're gone in 7 or 14 years, depending on when you make it into the senior service. So there is a beauty in kind of moving through the process that may not be for everyone. And maybe there's a correlation with minorities and their unwillingness to kind of go through that long, plodding process of giving, paying your dues at every level to make it to the next level. I don't have a magic bullet. I see talent there. I hope that talent stays. At the same time, when I have seen mid-level colleagues, whether they be minorities or not minorities, who want to leave, if they've got an amazing opportunity outside of government, I certainly haven't tried to stand in their way. I think there are amazing things to do with the kind of training and background that we get in the Foreign Service.
Thanks so much, Ambassador. And I want to invite Ambassador Bodine back to the conversation since we only have a few minutes remaining for some closing thoughts so that we can stay on time.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Hamid, and thank you very much, Ambassador Lu. First of all, I don't know if she is on this event, but I will certainly convey to Masha that she has been lauded for being able to swear like a sailor in Russian. Of all of her many accolades, that may be the one that she will treasure the most. And it's not necessarily what FSI teaches us when they're teaching us languages. It always takes a little bit extra work to find out how to speak a little bit more candidly and frankly when the need arises. I want to thank you very much. I think that this has been one of our stellar conversations in this series, and I'm delighted that, given the time difference, you were able to join us, and also to share, I think, your deep empathy for the people that make up the Foreign Service, that it is not sterile chess pieces on a chessboard being moved around, but people who have committed themselves to not just the career, but the life and the lifestyle, and the need to take care of them and to take proactive steps to make sure that not just the service, but our individual missions around the world reflect who we are as a country. And that they look like America and they look like Americans, as your son said to you. I think that was great. That will maybe be my favorite story from this, that along with Masha's linguistics talents. I want to thank the many people who are on this call today. While we all are tired of Zoom, Zoom has allowed us to take these conversations and bring in a far wider, diverse group of participants to be able to ask their questions directly of the remarkable Foreign Service officers such as Ambassador Lu. So with that, I will thank you all for spending this time this morning, afternoon, evening. And Ambassador Lu, I look forward to being able to thank you in person as soon as this craziness allows. So thank you very much.